Today we are building these small three-way stereo speakers. There are a few commercial speaker manufacturers that produce speakers that use some of the drivers that I'll be using in this build. Some of them sell for more than $4,000 a pair, which almost seems ridiculous since the drivers I'm using are only roughly $200 for the pair. But if you consider the cost of the design process, the enclosure materials and production thereof, markups by resellers and retailers, etc., I suppose it all makes sense. This is why being able to design and build your own speakers can be so cost effective for the return you gain in performance. So I set out to try my hand at designing and building my own take on a design that utilizes these drivers and are easily available to us in the DIY speaker building market. I am starting the build by cutting all the panels for the enclosures on the table saw and also using my track saw to cut an angle for the side panels. For the enclosure I'm using 5/8 of an inch or 16mm MDF, but you can also use birch plywood of the same thickness if you do not like working with MDF. Now this is not a copy of any of the manufacturer's designs, but rather inspired by those designs. I have not heard or even seen any of these speakers in person myself. This is my own design from scratch, crossover and all. So let's look at the drivers I'll be using. This is a three-way design with a 5 1/4 inch side firing woofer, the Tangband W51138 SMF. A fantastic small woofer that can go down to 35 Hz, but still play the upper and low mid frequencies with ease. The mid-range will be handled by the 3-inch Foundtech FE85 with aluminium cone, a great little full-range driver with a fast transient response, and despite being small and the low price should not be underestimated. I have front and rear firing tweeters in the form of the Dayton Audio ND25FA 4-ohm. I have not tried these tweeters before, but the reviews look good and it has a reasonably flat frequency response and good off-axis behavior, at least on paper. As we continue with the build, you can see me just marking out some of the angles on the panels, and then I'm setting my table saw blade to the correct angle to make those cuts. All the angles I need to cut are the same, so you only have to set up your table saw blade once to make all the cuts. I like the elegant slimline design that the small 3-inch driver and 5-inch side firing woofer can give us. The design is small for a floor stander with a footprint of only 250 by 115 millimeters, standing 800 millimeters tall without the spiked feet. Great for that wife acceptance factor, by the way. The baffle is slightly slanted backwards to facilitate time alignment between the full range driver and the front firing tweeter. The ambient tweeter on the back will help with opening up the soundstage and with imaging, and so should the narrow baffle. The slot port fires downwards and positioned inside the cabinet in such a way so that it also acts as internal bracing to the enclosure. Despite a few angles, this is really not a very complicated build, and I think anyone with some woodworking skill should be able to build this. So I'm starting the veneering process of the side panels now, that way I can have the glue dry while I'm continuing with other parts of the build. I've decided to veneer my speakers with walnut veneer. I use a technique that I favor above using contact cement. I'm just using PVA wood glue applied in a nice even layer, and then the veneer is placed on top. Once all the veneer is placed, I use some wax paper in between the layers, and then I use a lot of clamps to make sure that I get good pressure to clamp that veneer down so that we can get a really good bond between the MDF panel and the veneer. And I found that this gives me the best and very nice and smooth flat finish that bonds the veneer very well to the MDF. So once the glue has dried, I can use my trim router with a flush trim router bit just to trim the edges of the veneer flush with the MDF panel. So while that veneer and wood glue is drying, I am continuing to measure out and then just cut on my crosscut saw some of the additional panels that I'm going to need to make this enclosure. And here I'm just doing a dry fit with those additional panels that I've cut so that you can see what this enclosure looks like on the inside. Now that the veneered panels are dry, I can mark out a position for the side firing woofer and use my router with circle cutting jig to cut that hole. I can then knock out this plug because I didn't actually cut through all the way, and then I'm just using my file to clean that up, and a little bit of sanding just to smooth off those edges. And then just a quick trial fit of that woofer just to see if I cut that hole accurate, and it's looking good. I am marking off the rear panel of the speaker to cut it to length on the table saw. This panel will be cut slightly short with the rabbet on one end, cut on the router table to allow the 3mm aluminium terminal plate to fit flush. Here I am marking the round overs that must be cut on the panels that will become the slotted port, and also the internal enclosure of the full range driver. I am using a router bit that will give me a 1/2 inch or about a 12mm round over. These round overs will aid in reducing any potential chuffing noises that might be caused by the airflow through the port. On the inside of the panel that is directly opposite to the side panel of the side firing driver, I am using a 50mm Forstner drill bit to cut a recess to make sure that the airflow through the motor assembly of the driver is not obstructed. Next is the final glue up of all the enclosure panels, and I will speed this footage up slightly without comments since it is rather self-explanatory what I will be doing here.
You
Now that we've finished building the cabinets, there's some more veneering to do. I'm going to veneer the front, back and top of the cabinet. The process is very much the same as before. I'm using a brush to apply PVA wood glue, and then we can lay the enclosure on top of the veneer with a board underneath it, and then I'm just going to use PVA wood glue again and my brush to apply the glue to the other side, and we will be laying a piece of veneer over that and a board, and then clamp the whole assembly together. So you might have noticed that I've used masking tape just to mask off the top and bottom edges of the enclosure. This is just to prevent any squeeze out coming onto this veneer on the side panels when I clamp the assembly together. Veneering the top is easy. It's a very small piece and can easily be held down with a board just larger than the piece of veneer and some weights. I'm gluing these two pieces where the terminal plate goes, and this is just to allow the terminal plate to be screwed down onto something and also to provide a better seal. So once I've finished all the veneering, I just used my trim router to trim the edges, give it a little bit of a sand, and now we're going over to marking out and routing the holes for the front and rear firing tweeter and the little small mid-range driver on the front. Before we go over to finishing the cabinets, I'm giving it a good sanding. I've started with 240 grit sandpaper and then ended with 400 grit. To finish the enclosures, I am using Rust-Oleum's 2x Ultra Cover in clear satin. The terminal plates are cut from 3mm aluminium plate. I'm marking out the fixing holes for the terminal plate and also the two holes for the speaker terminals. I really like this countersink bit. I recently bought a set of 4 different sizes and they work great in wood and aluminium. I will leave a link in the description. I will also leave links in the description to most of the parts and equipment and tools that I've used during this build. The crossover is pretty straightforward, however it does use about 10 components. I tried to get this down, but the frequency response just needed it. It's only when you look at the modeled frequency response, including the individual drivers and their roll-offs, that you realize I did not include a slope on the side firing woof at all. It runs without any crossover. This is unusual, but it works with this particular driver. It also crosses over to the mid-range rather high, around 1.6 kHz, and the mid-range with the two tweeters at around 4 kHz. Impedance is normal at 4 ohms, with its lowest point of around 3 ohms at 4.6 kHz. This should still be good for amps that are rated to drive 4 ohm speakers. These speakers are not very sensitive, and at around 83 dB sensitivity, you will need an amp that can give you a good 100 watts of power per channel to make these sing. Even with this rather unusual driver configuration, I must admit that this is probably one of my favorite speakers to listen to right now. With really well recorded and quality music, this speaker just creates an incredible sense of being there. Of course, the placement of the speaker will be crucial, but more on that later. If you get it right, you will be rewarded with an incredible wide and deep soundstage with precise imaging that I've not heard on any other of my speaker designs before. The goal was to create a natural sounding speaker, and I think I've succeeded in doing so. You can check out the build plan shop on my website for the comprehensive build plans for this design. I will show everything from the parts and materials, cut list and the assembly of the speakers to the crossover design and layout. I also have many other plans available for purchase, so check it out and help support my channel in this way. It really does go a long way to help me continue what I'm doing on this channel. You can find the link to my website where you can purchase the plans at www.soundblab.net in the description below. None of the drivers in this build are supplied with gaskets, so I'm using some self-adhesive weather strip just to apply a thin strip on the back of each driver so that we prevent any air leakage coming between the driver and the enclosure. I'm using polyfill or Dacron. This is normally used in the upholstery industry. I'm using this to fill the cabinet to prevent any standing waves from bouncing around inside the enclosure. The self-adhesive weather stripping is also used to create a airtight seal between the terminal plate and the enclosure. You'll see here that I did not initially fix the crossover to the inside of the enclosure. This is just temporarily, and I just used some Dacron just to keep it in place. This is so that I can just do quick measurements and then later on come back and fix that crossover board in place. And finally, I made these adjustable standoffs off camera. It is 6mm aluminium plate, and I used a combination of birch plywood, adjustable table feet, some springs and nuts and felt pads to prevent damage to floors. You can, if you have carpet, use spikes instead. Just make sure that your spikes or feet are long enough to ensure that you have at least an inch or 25mm of clearance for the down-firing port. From the measured frequency response of the two speakers, we can see that it matches closely to the modeled response. The slight discrepancies between the two speakers you see here are only due to the side firing woofers being mirrored during the sweep. Thus, reflections in the room are influencing the measurements slightly. There is a slight dip in response from around 1.5 kHz to 3 kHz. I could tweak the crossover to get rid of this, however at the cost of a good impedance response and additional crossover parts. It is still plus minus 1.5 dB across the passband of the speaker, and after some listening test I'm happy that this is not a problem and probably benefits the soundstage somewhat in my opinion. The frequency versus minimum phase graph looks good with nothing out of the ordinary here. The distortion graph is interesting. We can see that the second harmonic is fairly high across the 5-inch woofer, but generally second harmonics are considered favorable. Overall, through the passband of 300 to 4000 Hz, we go from below 1% to below 0.2%, and at 1000 Hz being at below 0.5% on third harmonics. At the end, we want a speaker that does not cause listening fatigue, and I have listened to these speakers for more than an hour at higher volumes without experiencing this effect at all. The waterfall plot shows us decay of frequencies, and as can be expected with a small woofer, we can see that the decay improves as we move up in the frequency range and clean even at 40 dB down. This is not a bad looking graph, and I've seen so much worse on speakers costing way more. These speakers perform remarkably well across most genre of music. It has depth, creates atmosphere with very good mid-range purity. It is very transparent and shows a holographic image and focus that makes you think you are in the room with the musicians. These speakers disappear and the music seems to come from behind, and the soundstage will expand beyond them if you set them up correctly. I'm sure this must have something to do with the side firing woofer and the rear ambient tweeter. I am extremely happy with the outcome of this build. It took a while to complete and tweak the crossover until I was happy with the final response, but as I have said before, these are my favorite speakers to listen to at the moment. I am making plans available for purchase on my website at soundblab.net, so if you want to build a pair of these for yourself or even someone else, please see the link in the description below. But of course everyone will want to know what these sound like, and for those I will do a sound demo shortly. Please note that this is a demo, not a test, and what you hear through your system is unlikely to be an accurate representation of what these actually sound like. Placement of these speakers are crucial, and you have the option of placing the speakers with the side firing drivers facing inward or towards the outside. My suggestion is that if these are less than 2 meters from each other, to face them outward, and anything above that facing inward. This is how I'm setting up mine. Before the demo, please go ahead and subscribe to my channel if you have not done so yet. Please like the video and also consider to support me on Patreon for behind the scene updates on projects and more. Now on to the demo. Until next time, adios.
falling down, I will keep on searching for my highs. You can say I lost my mind, I will keep on holding my head high, even if the sky is falling down.